Good evening, everyone. It's Mike once again. We've got lots of people joining nice and fast, and we're delighted to have you back for our second Better Birding webinar series on pelagic birds and birding. We firstly must apologize for the change in time. Obviously, with the curfew at 9 o'clock and load shedding, I'm doing this from my offices, and knowing how much I can ramble on, we worried about getting home in time before the curfew. So please forgive us for changing the time. We might see a bit of an uptick in numbers at just before 7:30, but that would be great. And then I hope you're all sitting comfortably and ready with your glass of wine. If you have a glass of wine or you haven't run out already, but it's great to have everyone back, and looking forward to presenting some really awesome pelagic birds. So firstly, a quick welcome back. Dom, welcome back to the number 2. We might have you back for number 3 if you behave yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and good to be back. And yeah, I hope it's a fun evening. Sure it will be.
Yeah, I think you've got lots to teach a whole bunch of people, and maybe just to say that you and I spent some time together last week doing the Sasol 5 launch. How's that gone? And it was a fun event, and I think it worked very well. So just how's the sales going, and how's the response been?
Yeah, it was a fun evening, and I mean, I don't have any numbers, but I think from what I've heard, sales of both the app and the book have gone really well, and it sounds like the launch was well received.
Fantastic. So we do have Dave in the background here, and he's going to be managing the chat room and questions. So if at any stage during the presentation you want to make a comment or ask a question, just fire them through in the chat room, and Dave will relay them to us. He is sitting in the background, so Dave, you might just have to speak verbally. Thumbs up, great. Okay, so before we do anything else, we've just got to celebrate Dom's birthday. Happy birthday, Dom.
Yeah,
it was actually yesterday, and I spent a lot of time trawling the internet for a picture of a birthday cake with a seabird on it. And the best I could do with these two rather pudgy-looking blue-footed boobies, which is not in these webinars, but happy birthday. I hope you had a good day.
Thank you, yeah. It was a good day.
What, 24?
Yeah, something like that.
All right, okay, so let's start with mystery birds. And if you have any complaints about the difficulty here, Dom is the guy you're going to have to shout at. He's the one who put the presentation together for the mystery birds. I'm going to show you 4 photographs of pelagic birds during the evening. We're going to throw them in one at a time in between sections. And they're all of species that we are dealing with in this webinar, unlike last quiz where we had a few petrels thrown in amongst albatrosses. They are labeled A to D. Once you know all 4 species, so when we throw up number D and you know it, if you can send a WhatsApp to Dave, there's his telephone number, 082545800. Label it ABCD. It's quite a lot of admin, but if you want to win this book, you're going to have to put up with some admin. And send those. We won't be too strict on the spelling. So send the answers through to Dave, and he will announce the winner at the end. So it's going to be the first response that is correct. And I've had to have a very stern word with Trevor. And I've told him that he and his wife, Margaret, are banned from entering the competition this time round. So Trevor, sit on your hands, please. All right, so here's the first one. I'm going to show you the picture for a couple of seconds. You'll see it again during the evening because it forms part of the quadrant. So Dom, nice pick there. What we've done is we've taken some really crap photos of yours.
Yeah.
Can we confirm that? That's your photo?
Yep, they're all my rubbish photos, and they were taken with these mystery bird quizzes in mind. So
okay.
That's why they are as poor as they are.
You could have taken better ones,
yeah.
And maybe we're using some of those in the presentation. All right, so talking about photographs, we're very fortunate tonight to have contributions from people that we know, and people that we bird with, and people who are local birders and local celebrities, and well, birding celebrities, I guess. And so they would really appreciate it if you follow them on Instagram. So our good friends John and Trevor and Pete. So John is one of the top birders in the country. We all know Trevor, and obviously we all know Pete as well. He's been a webinar guest of ours. So there are their Instagram handles at the bottom: John MD Graham, Trevor _Hardaker, and P Ryan _Seabirds. And then a couple more. Obviously, we'd love you to follow Dom's Instagram page. He's not great at posting pics. Dom, you want to maybe lift up the volume a little bit on your pictures?
Yeah, I mean, I probably should be. I'm just lazy, I guess.
Okay. He's very busy with Sasol, I think. And then Niall Perrins has given some great photographs for this evening. And then obviously, most people are aware of my Instagram handle as well. Okay, so before we talk about pelagic trips, we'll talk about, we talked about pelagic trips last week. Let's talk about land-based pelagic birding. And the reason I threw this slide in, Dom, is because we've had probably the biggest storm in 10 years over the last weekend.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a perfect opportunity, to get out and go do some land-based pelagic birding. So I mean, there's a few of the popular spots that you've highlighted here. I mean, you've really got to go as it finishes, basically. So we went out yesterday afternoon, a few of us, to Clifton and to a spot where we do a lot of pelagic birding with our scopes, and we had one Kerguelen. It was the our total.
I mean, Clifton is a relatively new pelagic bird watching spot for me. Were there any serious questions asked of you standing on the Clifton rocks with scopes? Let's move on. But I think, yeah, I mean, Clifton is not a traditional spot, but I know Dom's been working it and has had some great birds. The traditional spots are Cape Point is obviously the best, just below the lighthouse. Cormacky is really good, although it's difficult to get high up above the waves. Huncliffe is great, and then Danger Point down in Gordon's Bay, and there's been some great pelagic birds. I think in Hermanus as well, we had that grey-headed albatross.
Yeah, they had a white morph southern giant petrel
a couple of days ago, yeah. Tennis got a white morph southern giant. Yeah, but Cape Point really is the spot, but at the moment you're not able to get out of your car there and pelagic watch. And yeah, I think with no pelagic trips actually traveling, it's difficult to actually see these pelagic birds aside from using a scope.
Yeah.
So this pic on the left is the Clifton watch, and that looks a lot more comfortable than the Cormacky watch, which is the one on the right. That was us a couple of weeks back. Dave, we've got a question.
I do. Dom, there's a question for you. Are there any good land-based pelagic spots in KZN?
Not that I know of, really. I mean, you can go to the piers in Richards Bay and in Durban. You get I mean, there's no peninsulas that really stick out off the east coast, but by going to these long piers, like there's North Pier, I think it is, in Durban, which is quite a good one, and then there's the two piers near Alkenstrand beach in Richards Bay, which have had good results over the years, but it's very different to sea watching off the Cape, where you're much closer to the continental drop off.
I guess the diversity is also a lot lower.
It is a lot lower, yeah. You get a few shearwaters and things. We've had a few shearwater sightings over the years up there, but you're not going to get
the numbers that we get, yeah.
Numbers or diversity, yeah.
I mean, maybe just to make the comment that you shouldn't bother doing land-based pelagic watching unless you have a good scope, and you need to be able to brave the elements. So you can see in that pic on the right, that was 2 weeks ago during a very strong storm, and often it can be very difficult with rain squalls and poor light. So it's not ideal, but there are some hardened land-based pelagic watchers who've seen some incredible species. So always worth a try. And then on the note of this big storm we've had, I apologize, I don't know who took this photograph. I think we're trying to find out. It was sent to me on a WhatsApp group. This bird was found a couple of days ago in the aftermath of the recent storm. It's, I'll give it away. It's not a hard bird to identify. It's a broad-billed Prion, although there's a possibility it's McGillivray's, but we don't think it's that. And this bird was found in Edgemead, which is a landlocked suburb of Cape Town. It's not that far from the ocean, but to see a pelagic species of this nature so close to, well, on land, far away from the deep ocean is very unusual. It shows the power of the storm.
Yeah, and I mean, as we'll talk about later in the webinar, this is probably the best way to identify prions is when you can get your ruler out and measure that bill width. Yeah.
Great. We'll talk about prions in a sec. And then just a quick slide to remind you, we had a slide of all the Southern Ocean islands. In our reference slides, we've got the islands on which the birds breed, and often that means very little to us unless we really know where they are. So obviously South Africa is right in the southern part of this image.
Corner, yeah.
Southwest corner, you can see the tip of South Africa there. It's a bit of an awkward slide, but that's the best way to represent it, is showing Antarctica in the middle. All right, Dom, so let's kick into things. So where do we begin? Because on a pelagic trip, you're kind of faced with this melee of bird species in front of you when you get lucky, I guess, with the trawler. So this photograph was taken in the wake of a trawler exactly a year ago. In fact, a year ago today, I was on a pelagic trip. And, you know, I mean, if you just run your eye through this image, we've got a nice...
So Salvin Fulmar in the middle there.
Okay.
And it's a Cape or Pintado Petrel. We've got some gannets, black-billed albatrosses, and shy albatross at the top there, I think, maybe. But it's basically just figuring out the common species, and when you're looking for something different.
Yes.
So I mean, we'll be talking through all the petrels tonight, and we've noted which are the more common or regularly occurring ones. So it's really just getting to grips with these common ones, and then just look for something different, and then, you know, photograph it and interrogate it when something different does crop up, as it is with a lot of birding, or most birding, I guess.
All right, so let's just contextualize things. I don't think we did this, I didn't do this very well in the last webinar, but we are specifically speaking about a group of birds called the tube noses, which are the Procellaria forms.
Yep.
And they include the great albatrosses, which we dealt with, the mollymawk albatrosses, the smaller ones, and then moving into giant petrels, the gadfly petrels or the pterodromas, the Fulmarine Petrels,
Yep.
Prions and Blue Petrel. We lump Prions and Blue Petrel together. They're very similar in structure and size. The Bulwaria and Pseudobulwaria Petrels, and generally those are more tropical pelagic species. The Procellaria Petrels, which are the larger petrels. I mean, they're smaller than the GPs, giant petrels, but they're amongst the larger petrel forms. And then the next time we'll deal with shearwaters, then obviously storm petrels. So that was webinar 1. This is webinar 2, and that will be webinar 3. So just, I did this slide just to give some idea of the size comparisons of all these tube noses. Dom, it's very crude, but it does give a good comparison of great albatrosses versus the stormies.
Yeah, so the Procellaria forms, it's one order of the let's see. Yeah, so comprising four families.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, this slide shows it quite nicely. But from the great albatrosses, which can weigh up to about 10 kilograms, down to the storm petrels, which I think at their lightest are 20 grams. So I mean, it's just amazing that these birds can spend their lives at sea, you know, putting up with these massive storms, massive waves. But yeah, just a huge diversity within this order.
Yeah, and also a huge diversity throughout the latitudes as well. So we've got some tropical petrels, a huge number of tropical petrels, and as well as the deeper ocean ones. And those are the ones that we generally see more often than the tropical ones.
Yeah, so birds coming up from the subantarctic waters, which generally breed on the subantarctic islands. And during winters, when we get the large numbers, or moving up to escape those cold waters.
If only we could get onto a boat at the moment in the wake of the storm.
Yeah, it would be really interesting.
All right, so now we'll move on to the birds we're going to deal with. We're going to start with the giant petrels. We're going to do the Fulmarine Petrels, Blue Petrel, the Prions, and you'll notice the status. So Dom, you made the comment about looking for the unusual one. We will try and focus and highlight the ones that you should see a lot of, so people are familiar with those, and then you can pick out the ones that are
exactly
trickier. All right, so and then the gadflies and pterodromas, and I think these are my favorite of all the petrels because they're just such efficient flyers.
Yeah, it's just amazing to watch, and just it's probably the best way to pick them out as a gadfly or pterodroma, just to watch him fly. It's like I've heard him being described as a marble within a sphere. It just rolls up and down. Yeah, so just doing these big arcs. But yeah, they are great flies.
And then we'll talk about the Bulwaria and Pseudobulwarias, and you can see that those are very rare species in Southern Africa, but we will touch on those. And then the Procellaria petrels, which are the larger ones. So that's grey, white, and spectacled. All right, so I hope you've all had an opportunity to look at bird number A. So that's Dom's first terrible photograph. And here comes his second terrible photograph. So that's mystery bird number B. So I think everyone must start typing A is whatever and B is whatever. Don't send it to Dave yet. You must only send your answer once you've got all 4 species ready to go. All right, so the giant petrels. Let's start with those. Dom, you want to tell us how to ID this one just straight off the bat very briefly?
Yeah, so just off the bat, the best way to identify or separate the 2 giant petrels is to look at the color of the bill tip. So in this case, it's got a reddish hue. So it's a northern giant petrel.
And we'll look at the differences a little more closely. We've obviously thrown these 2 slides together. There are obviously other differences other than just the bill tip, but it's the most effective way.
Yeah, and a lot of people always get confused, which is, so northern has a red bill and southern has a green bill tip. And a nice way to remember is if you think of a traffic light. So in the top is the red. Yeah. So in the north, so that's northern. And in the bottom is green, which is southern. And it's also a nice way to remember, if you can never remember which way around the traffic light is, just think back to your
giant petrels. Fantastic. Yeah. Okay, so I think I probably remember the giant petrels better than I remember traffic lights. Yeah. Okay, so here's a nice comparison shot of 2 adult birds. And we'll talk about each one individually, but just very quickly, the northern GPs tend to have a lot more white on the underbelly, underparts.
So less contrast between the head and the body. So if you look at that southern giant petrel on the right, it's got a much whiter head, and that contrasts slightly with the belly and the chest. Where compare that with this northern here, it pretty much goes from the head straight into the face into the underparts. And generally, if you can see a dark tip, maybe more distant bird, it's generally more likely to be a northern giant petrel, because that dark red is more likely to show up. Where if it looks like the bill color is the same throughout, it's more likely to be a southern. But best way is to get photos and have a look at this.
And maybe a point to make, because we haven't made it yet, but these giant petrels are truly giant birds. They are in some cases bigger than the mollymawks.
Yeah,
so they're massive, very large petrels.
And these things, rip apart, seals, dead seals on the breeding islands. So not many things can get through the blubber. They've got these massive bills, and that's the other thing to note. Like you can sometimes, especially from a land-based sea watch, you might wonder if you're on a white-chinned petrel or a giant petrel, from a distance of a few hundred meters, but you're really looking for that massive bill. Yeah. And it really does show up even from a distance.
And another very noticeable feature I find with the giant petrels is that real hunchback. Yeah, they have that very hunched back, which is quite noticeable at a distance as well.
Yeah, and just really chunky, solid-looking birds.
All right, so talking about the bulls, we've spoken about the bulls. These are 2 juvenile birds, but in the very young birds, the bill tips are very hard to separate. But even in juvenile birds, you will find a southern will have a greenish hue, and then the northern will have that orange starting to come through. Yeah,
and then as you can see in the slide here, so with the giant petrels, both species, they start off really dark as juveniles, and they lighten as they get older. And then you can see this very almost entirely white head of that old southern giant.
So I'm going to just pause and say that we must take note that we are using Fancy's illustrations again. Oh, yeah. And I think everyone will concur. I think a lot of people have seen them in the new Sasol. But once again, a huge congratulations to Fancy for his amazing illustrations. We're very lucky to be able to use these in our webinar.
Yeah, I mean, they really are some of the best I've ever seen when it comes to seabird illustrations.
The comment made last week at the launch was that his shearwater illustrations are just out of this world. So that's something to look forward to for the next one. All right, and there's 2 much more mature birds, and you can see the differences there.
Yeah, so again, in that top bird, John's picture there, you can see that dark tip. I mean, even at a distance, you could maybe not tell that it's red, but you could at least say that it's got a dark tip. And then when you get a photo and zoom in, you actually see that it's got that darkish red hue compared to the southern, that's a nice adult at the bottom there. And at first glance, you don't see the green, but it looks like it's a one color.
Yeah, I think it's also true to say that these are quite creepy looking birds with those weird pale eyes and that's very dark pupil.
Beady looking eye.
Beady eye. All right, so we've spoken a lot about these already in terms of separating. So, but I think that photo illustrates exactly the point you're making about that dark tip. So a slightly distant shot, the dark tip is very obvious, and you'd pick that up at a distance.
Yeah, you should do, yeah.
Right, and then obviously it's a regularly occurring species for us. We've allocated a status of 2. You see them year round. You see them from the shore. You've seen quite a few from your sea watches.
Yeah, most of the sea watches we've been doing of late, we've been picking up a giant petrel, but it's quite rare that you can get it down to a species, especially from a few hundred meters out. But occasionally you get a really nice old bird like this northern giant petrel, Trevor's, and you can see there's a very little difference there between the head and the underparts. It sort of merges into one.
So I mean, I just want to clarify. You say it's tricky to pick them apart, but I know you've ticked northern giant in the wider Cape Town challenge. So you're comfortable. You got enough of the bird you saw that you could tick it. I just want to make sure we're happy with that.
Yeah, no, definitely. So these older birds, you can tell in plumage.
All right, I trust you. All right, so we've highlighted reddish tip to the bill, that darker cap, the head and belly sort of merge into the paleness, and then those evenly dark wings. Right, then we'll just spin through some photos. There's a great pic of a bird sitting on the water from John, and there you can see a nice view of the underparts in good light. Slightly younger bird. But the bill tip is not entirely dark there, but this is a darkish tip. You can see the orange.
Yeah, it's noticeably dark.
Yeah. All right, and there's that bird sitting on the water. Nice pic from Trevor. Okay, moving on to southern giant, and this is the pic we saw earlier, the very pale head and the darker belly.
Yeah.
Nice pale tip. And once again, very similar. I think you see even numbers of each. You're not going to see one more than the other.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point, actually. So I don't know if people are noting the world population there. There's almost a quarter. There's about a quarter. So it's about 25,000 northerns,
really,
and over 100,000 southerns, and yet we don't really seem to get a discrepancy in our birds off the Cape here, at least.
Okay.
I know there's fewer northerns probably up the east coast of Durban. I think southern is probably a more common bird there.
Okay.
But interesting that we don't really get a difference here.
Great. So I think these are 2 birds that if you go on a pelagic trip, you're going to want to try pick one of these up, or both of them. And then obviously southern, we hadn't spoken about it yet, but it's got this really amazing white morph. In fact, we did mention it. Tina's had a white morph bird off a land-based watch today, I think, or yesterday.
Yeah, so northern doesn't get this white morph as far as we know. So you can safely assume if you do see a white morph bird that it is a southern. Most of these birds show a few dark feathers, but you do get the odd bird which is pure white. And really beautiful birds. Like that bird there in the top right is showing still a few dark feathers.
It's just amazing how those dark feathers take a while to fall out, and they do so in a rather haphazard fashion.
Yeah.
So I love this shot of yours on the left. It really shows the real character of the bird.
Yeah.
Nice feather detail.
Yeah, and shows that white face and head compared to the darker body. And I think there's something if you just go back to that shot, I think southerns, if I got it right, show a bit more of a white leading edge to the wing. I think it could be the other way around.
No, I think that's right. Yeah, that's the point that's made.
Shows it quite nicely.
Great, and then there's a beautiful white morph bird. Lovely photo from John, and then this dark juvenile, which hasn't really started to whiten yet.
Yeah,
but very clearly a southern giant with that greenish bill. All right, so that's the GPs, and they are the brutes of the ocean. They're scavengers, and they're not particularly dainty birds. And now we're moving on to some of our most dainty petrels, the Fulmarine Petrels.
Yeah, and really, really good-looking birds, all 3 of them, Antarctic, Cape, and Southern Fulmar, are very distinctive-looking birds. Yeah. And not something you should really battle too much.
Yeah, I mean, I must be honest. I didn't know that Southern Fulmar was classified as a Fulmarine Petrel. I guess the name does say it, but it's interesting to see that they're put together in the category of Fulmarine Petrels. So those are the 3 birds, and once again, these are just stunning birds. Most pelagic birders would have had good views of Cape Petrel or Pintado. And we'll use the name interchangeably. Yeah. I don't know, what is the official name? I think it's Cape, actually.
So it's not Cape, but Pintado, I believe it's in Spanish, means painted. So it's a great name for it. I mean, it does look like it's been painted.
Yeah,
it's upper parts. They really are beautiful birds. But I think Cape is now the official name.
Yeah. when I searched it on eBird, it was referred to as Cape Petrel.
Yeah.
And then the top right, that's Antarctic Petrel, and then obviously Southern Fulmar on the left-hand side there. And that's just the lovely plate of fancies, and we'll see that in a bit more detail, but just to compare the three species on one plate. So let's start with Southern Fulmar. We've given it a status of 7, and I must say this is a bird that I was desperately keen to see, and I finally got to see one last year on the pelagic trip that I was on exactly a year ago.
Yeah.
But they're not easy to find.
No, they're not, but we seem to get 1 or 2 most winters, and normally, May, June, July seems to be about the best months for them. They often hang out in the Cape or Pintado Petrel flocks.
Okay.
So if you have a good look through, not that they're similar,
yeah.
but they often do hang out with the Pintado Petrels. And I think about 2 or 3 years ago, we didn't have one for maybe 3 seasons or 2 seasons. But besides that, pretty much every year we do get a bird.
But it's a bird you'd expect to see almost strictly in winter.
Yeah. Pretty much, yeah.
And I see the population, 4 million birds. It's least concern. It's not a particularly rare bird worldwide, but just because of its southern habits, it's harder to see.
They breed on a lot of the like Bouvet Island, so the island's really far south. I think they're even on the Antarctic Peninsula, pretty much. Yeah, some of the islands around the Antarctic. So we just need the cold weather to push them up north.
All right, so a very distinctive looking bird, and I noticed in your schedule of confusion species, you didn't pick a confusion species. I guess maybe a hot-lip skull would be something that you might confuse it with, but then as soon as you see that amazing bill, you're likely to pin down.
Yeah, the bill and those white patches in the primaries, the base of the primaries. There's not really too much.
Except Northern Fulmar, and that would really be exciting if we had a Northern
Fulmar.
It
would be. So like if you were in the Northern Hemisphere, you might you might have to look for the Fulmars in amongst the gulls, perhaps. Yes. But really down here, it's
pretty easy.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
All right, and there's that beautiful bill, and it just goes to show how accurate Fancy's illustrations are.
Yeah.
Really, really well depicted in that illustration. And then one of our absolute favorite birds here in the Cape, it's the Pintado Cape Petrel. I've chosen to use the name Pintado. It just seems to be so much more pleasant. And I mean, what interested me when I pulled this map out is that breeding range. They obviously, well, not necessarily breeding range, but their wandering range. They go very far south.
Yeah, they do. And again, it's one of these birds which breeds right far down south. So these are around some of the Antarctic islands again. And I think basically like May to November. So you do even get some stragglers into December. And big flocks in midwinter. So if we had to go out now, we could see thousands behind a trawler, which is really quite something to see.
Yeah, it is an amazing sight to see these birds, and we had plenty of them at this time of the year. So not too much difficulty. We'll come to Antarctic and where there might be some confusion.
Yep.
But if you struggle to identify the upper side of a Pintado, then maybe don't know what to say actually. All right.
And then we just go back to, so we highlighted this in the book launch last week.
Yes, of course. I wanted to speak about that.
So have a look at that bird on the right, which is the underside, and compare it. So look at the upper wing. You've got the white patches there. And then, so if you were to see this bird from the underside, those will essentially act as translucent patches. And Fancy's picked out that detail in the underwing here and shown those paler patches, which just shows the incredible detail that he does go into in these illustrations. Yeah. It was quite cool when he pointed it out last week.
Yes, none of us really knew that.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the top side of the bird, and Fancy also spoke about the small amounts of black on the white feathers, and you have to paint each individual feather to get that effect. And there you can see that translucence actually coming through even in this underside shot.
Yeah.
And that's what we've illustrated over here. But really a beautiful bird and easy to come by, fortunately.
Yeah.
This one's not so easy to come by.
No, so this is mega in Southern African waters. I think there's been a handful of records, most of them from a really long time ago.
Yeah.
And it's so this one does breed on mainland Antarctica actually, and some of the islands of Antarctica. And it's even pretty rare, I think, on Marion and those places. So it's still got another 1,500 kilometers to push up till it hits our waters.
So not one we'd expect too many of our viewers to see. This photo is obviously yours. Was this photographed obviously on the Gallus deep south?
Yeah, this is right down south in amongst the ice, where they are common, and they're beautiful birds. I mean, so distinctive, like beautiful patterning in the tail, and that brown. It's a really,
attractive looking.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I mean, we've got there's a picture of the underside. So the striking plumage, the white in the upper wings is very obvious, and you can see it there in the photo. Beautiful pics, and then I think the one thing I wanted to do was just to put these two side by side. It would be unusual for you only to get an underside view of one of these birds out at sea, because they do jinx around a lot. But there are fairly obvious differences. The Antarctic seems to be a browner bird.
It's a browner bird. It also, it's a much heavier bird.
Okay.
I think it's probably a third heavier than the Pintado or Cape Petrel. And I don't think it ever shows those spots in the vent, which the Cape or Pintado does. And this bird on the right, the Antarctic's actually, so that's in it's quite a warm-looking bird.
Yeah.
So they especially show the wear of the feathers on their neck there.
But an easy identification there. You can see the undersides are lined up there. I think we don't need to worry too much about the identification of these birds.
No, I don't think you should battle too much.
And there's another illustration of Fancy's attention to detail. So obviously the upper side of the wings of the Antarctic petrel are white, and he's shown that white shining through on a fuller part of the wing, whereas the Pintado is only showing it on those primaries.
Yeah.
All right, so we're done with the GPs, and we've now handled the Fulmarines.
Yeah.
So it's time for another mystery bird. So everyone's still scratching their heads at these two terrible photos, and they can probably scratch their head a little bit more. You were closer to this bird than the other two, Dom.
I was, yeah. I mean, they're not great photos.
Not great photos.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll so this is a great photo,
it is, yeah.
And it really captures the essence of this wonderful bird. This is right up in the top of my list of birds to see out at sea. I haven't seen one yet. You've obviously seen a few.
Yeah. So they're great little birds, and this is Neil's pick. It's a lovely pick. I really like it. It really stands out against that dark background. And so we'll probably be talking about it now. It's pretty rare. It's very rare in Southern African waters, but it's like a lot of these seabirds we're going to be talking about today. You just need to get beyond the continental drop-off, which is no small matter. But as soon as you do get beyond that continental drop-off, these things are not all that uncommon.
Yeah. And how far is that still? That's obviously reachable within our sub-region listing area.
Yeah. So like off the Gallus Bank, where a lot of fishing happens, that's where I spend a lot of time out on fishing boats, and it's about 250-300 kilometers, I think, from land. And when we were in those waters, I was seeing these birds with some regularity every week or so, getting a blue petrel.
The Vietnamese fishermen weren't as interested.
They weren't as interested, no.
All right. So I mean, it's a tiny bird, and obviously quite a common bird, but in our waters, obviously very tough because it's a deeper south bird, but incredibly attractive. And what stood out to me, and we'll compare it to a prion in a sec, is the very small, fine, dark bill in comparison with the prion.
Yeah. So there's a few features. There's that. I mean, for most. Probably the most obvious feature is that white tip to the tail, which when you see alongside a prion, as you often do, those got dark tips, this got a white tip, so it really does stand out. There's also that dark
collar.
Yeah, dark grey collar or even black collar, and the blackish or dark grey crown, which are different to the prions.
And we'll see it in some of the photos. We've got some nice pics. The white cheek is also a very obvious feature when you see the bird quite quickly.
I think it's because you see it against the
dark collar.
Yeah, exactly. So it really stands out, whereas it might not be such an obvious feature in a prion.
Yeah. So this is your photo as well, and we're going to ask you to identify the prion, top left. Can you tell us, is it a Salvin, is it an Antarctic, or
It's a Prion.
It's a Prion. Okay, so it's a Prion, and you can notice immediately the white tip to the tail.
Yeah, really stands out. And if you look at the dark tip in the Prion, and there again, you can see the dark collar even on this bird, even though it's a little bit shaded, and the black crown.
Yeah, and that, I mean, I'll repeat it. That fine dark bill.
Yeah, exactly.
Is very obvious when I looked at this photograph.
And it's a really dark black bill, compared to the bluey grey of our Prions.
Correct. All right, so there's a whole selection of photos, and the only reason I put a whole selection of photos is because I just love looking at this bird. So that top row are some great photos from John, and then the bottom row are the great photos from you as well. I won't say whose are greater, but they really are lovely birds to see. And although it's not a bird that we have a very good chance of seeing as sub-region birders on a one-day pelagic trip, it's such an attractive bird, and I think it's one of those wish list birds that it's worth covering in a bit of detail.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Prions,
okay.
and we're going to try and do this in 10 seconds, so we can get it done as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
All right, so maybe just to preface that, and for those that haven't been out to sea and looked at Prions, it's really tough for the guides out there because the margin between Salvins and an Antarctic and a McGillivrays and the Salvins and a McGillivrays and a broad-billed and an Antarctic and a slender-billed, the margins are so unbelievably narrow, and these birds fly unbelievably quickly. And even in the hand, you need a ruler to actually sometimes separate them, because you might get some big-billed Antarctics and some small-billed Salvins, or you might get some big-billed Slenders and some small-billed Antarctics.
Yeah, so there's overlap also. There's overlap between the bill widths, and that should be the best feature. So it's maybe waiting for classic birds, showing all the classic features of that specific species. And I mean, as a general rule, what we do in South African or Southern African waters, we assume it's an Antarctic Prion, unless we can prove otherwise. There must be Salvins coming in regularly. There must be broad-bills, McGillivrays coming in. There are slender-bills, which we can also pick out occasionally. Yeah. And it's mostly birding with your camera. So trying to pick out these birds, with 100 Prions zooming around you, it's really, if you can get a nice shot and then compare bill width and that sort of thing.
But even then, it still raises a lot of debate, and sometimes it's not even worth going there. And as you say, if you see a flock full of Antarctics, no one's going to shout. If you see a flock full of Prions in winter in Cape Town, no one's going to shout at you for ticking Antarctic safely. But you might be scrutinized if you tick some of the others like Salvins and slender-billed.
Yeah. So again, I think just getting a nice photo would be your best case, really.
So I mean, we've put this slide up, and I think it's nice to just compare them. It's nice to see their world distributions. Obviously, Antarctic's got the broadest distribution of all of them, and then fairy Prion is a bird that's extremely rare here, and you can see their relative sort of statuses in our opinion. Yeah. But getting down to practicalities, 99 out of 100 of these Prions are likely to be Antarctics, and don't shout at your guide if he can't find you yourself. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Okay. So, I was with
Dave. Have you got a question there?
I'm amazed by the number. 50 million Antarctic Prions compared to the others.
Yes, so
it's way more abundant. There must be a few more species in there that
So Dave, you want a few more splits in the Antarctic Prion complex. Okay, so we're gonna just show that this is an illustration taken straight out of the new Sasol. So Fancy's applied his museum skills to painting these birds, and you can see the variation, but these are obviously the classic bill sizes, and you said they do actually merge with one another.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of overlap in the extremes of all of these birds. And something we haven't added in there either is the McGillivrays Prion, which fits in between broad-billed and Salvins there. And it's pretty much, I think, been accepted now as a species, or should be soon, on Gough Island. Okay. And so you get the broad-billed and you get the McGillivrays there. And they, one nest, I think, in burrows and in caves, and so in different times of year.
All right, so what we'll do is we'll go through each one, but once again, we're not going to spend a lot of time. I think we've highlighted the difficulties here. And I can tell you that seeing Prions out at sea is an amazing experience. So take your camera, take as many pictures as you can, and you might be lucky enough to pick out a classic slender-billed or a classic solvents, but there's no such thing, I guess, as a classic solvents.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so this is broad-billed and very steep forehead.
Yeah, very steep forehead.
Enormous bill.
Yeah, it really, I mean, it looks almost like a duck when you see it from the front on. And it's got that all black bill, which you can just about see in the photograph here. So McGillivrays does show apparently a bit of blue on the sides of the bill, whereas broadbills, your classic broadbills, should have entirely black bills.
So I know when we were just getting ready to go, we were looking at that photo of that Prion found in Edgemead.
Yeah.
And your comment was immediately, there's no blue on the bill, it's an all black bill. That's a definite broadbill.
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't have said definite.
Okay, well, we don't want to hold you to it, but I mean that was the feature you looked for.
Yeah, it is a good feature as far as we know, but we're still finding out more about these McGillivrays, and I mean, it's still not to be found out.
All right, so this is a pic from Pete, and you'll notice that he gave me a sufficiently slightly out of close range, sharp picture, just so that we can't question whether that really is a solvents. But I know with Pete, he would have been certain that he has photographed this bird very close to its breeding islands, and to most likely to be a classic solvents and not taken in our waters here.
Yeah, I mean,
I hope Pete's not listening to this now.
I was birding with Barry. We were on the SA Gullis with Barry Rose off the Prince Edward Islands, and he was saying the only way to tell about a solvents is if you can see the islands in the background behind the bird.
The islands, the breeding islands.
So that's probably the best way to tell them. But I mean, I think they show slightly different facial patterning between that and Antarctic. They've got a slightly heavier bill, but besides that, there really is not much in it.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned the late, great Barry Rose. I mean, he had the best eyes in the business. And if Barry Rose can't pick out a solvents, then I don't think anybody can. All right, and then no doubt the best photograph we were going to have of a Prion tonight was going to be in Antarctic. So this is an absolutely magnificent photo taken by John.
Yeah.
So, John, if you're out there listening, this is magic to have your pick here. But just such a beautiful bird and such a classic-looking Antarctic there, and yeah, very nice to see it. And then this is also very, I think, classic-looking slender-billed. You can quite easily see from this angle. And then John sent me a whole bunch of pictures of slender-billed, but I picked this one because it's got the right angle from above where you can see the slender-billed quite clearly.
Yeah, so slender-billed is one you can pick out with good enough views or photographs. So it's generally got a paler face,
yes,
and just a paler feel about the bird, which I think is
just washed out.
Yeah, it generally is actually. So that pale face, and also has quite sharp features on the face. So it's got that quite defined, maybe is the word I should use, defined eye stripe.
Okay. So
it starts off thin and then it broadens as it goes through the eye, and then that's the supercilium. Then the white supercilium really stands out.
Yeah.
So very defined facial features of the slender-billed Prion. And then if you look at the tail, it's got the dark is mostly confined to the inner tail feathers, with the outer tail feathers being all grey. Yeah. So that is also a good feature. And I think, if I got this right, I think the upper wing is meant to be, I think it has less of a defined M.
M, yes.
So all
more
these
washed
Prions,
out, as you're saying. Yeah.
So all these Prions have this very distinct M across the upper parts, as do a lot of the pterodromas also show this M patterning. But yeah, if you give this tiny little birds white underneath that M,
then you've got a Prion.
Yeah.
And then this is a bird that is far more common in New Zealand and Australian waters. Not one that we see at all regularly, but just included. It's obviously been recorded on our list, but it's, as you can see, a status of 9 there. It's not something we're likely to see that easily here, but also quite a lot more distinctive. It's got a very broad black terminal band.
Yep.
And then also I've noticed it's got a much sort of plainer face.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So this is another one you can pick out and see that, I mean, it's fanning its tail a little bit there.
Which makes it hard to see the broader band,
Yeah, but it is a really good feature. It's got a much broader black tip to the tail, and you can actually see that at sea. And as you said, it's got that much plainer face, and that it's got quite a stubby bill, but it's I think it's about the thinnest of the Prions, but it is a shorter bill.
Yeah, and this is a great pick from Neil, and I suspect he took this on his trip to New Zealand and not in our sub-region waters.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've rushed through the prions. In fact, we spent a little bit longer on the prions than I expected to, but I have clarified that don't shout at your guide when he can't tell you that you've got a slender-billed prion in front of you. So now we'll move on to I think, my favorite group of petrels. That's what are called the pterodromas. And we get quite a nice selection of them in Southern African waters, some really common and then some really, really tough. So we've got soft-plumaged, top left, that's sort of marginally tough to find, but relatively common.
Yeah.
Barras, we'll talk about that in a sec, that's a mega. Trindade is a super mega. I think we'll talk about that as well a bit later. White-headed was kind of a mythical bird for most of us until we got into flock, and we'll talk about that as well. Great wing's probably the most common of all the pterodromas that we see in our waters, particularly in summer. And soft plumage. And then Atlantic is really tough, and then Kerguelen is also really tough, but much more common further south. So let's go into them each one at a time. So one of the most regularly occurring pterodromas, and we saw plenty of these on flock, but you don't see them that easily on a one-day pelagic trip.
No, you don't, because we don't get out far enough. So again, if we can get to the oceanic waters beyond the continental shelf, they're not uncommon at all. And even all the way up to Durban, even up to Mozambique, they're not difficult.
Okay, so tell us about the features of a soft-plumaged petrel. What are you looking for when you're birding out at sea and you see a fast-flying pterodroma?
Yeah, so it'll have the classic, this will apply to all the pterodromas. It's got that classic flight, so with big arcs up and down, going 20, 30 meters above the waves and then down again. So it's very different to like a shearwater or to a white-chinned petrel, which is a much lazier, languid flight up and down. So you're first looking for that. And then if you can get it down to pterodroma, so you're looking for this white vent belly with the dark wings. It really does stand out. And then as you look a bit closer, you see it's got this dark collar, which is very variable. So like we've got a paler individual on the left, and that's almost approaching a Xenos or a phase petrel from West Africa. And then you can get darker birds in between the dark individual and that rare dark morph, which is extremely rare. And there's very few photographs around of that bird. I know Peter's got a very nice shot, probably the best shot I've seen of that. And that looks a lot like a Kerguelen petrel.
Yeah, we'll talk about the comparison with Kerguelen when we get there.
Yep.
But I think also quite important to notice that it has this grey tail and rump, which is quite important when separating from something like a white-headed petrel.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right, so those are the key features. There's a nice pic of John's, those dark underwings, that grey collar, the dark eye, and you can't see the vent and the rump and the tail over here, but there you can see that very clearly. And it's got a bit of an M, much like the prions do.
Yeah, much like a lot of the smaller seabirds do.
Right. So we've cleared up soft plumage, and we often call them softies. So nice to see a softie out at sea. I haven't seen too many until I got into flock, and then we had quite a few of them as we were quite a long way south. Great wings. This is a bird that we see quite often.
Yeah. So again, it's just getting off the continental shelf, and they are pretty common the further you go out. But maybe 1 in 3 trips you'll get them on a Cape Pelagic, and if you do, it's 1 or 2 birds.
But you've made the comment here, they're almost more regular off a Durban Pelagic. You can see them in the further,
and you can see them in good numbers there. Okay. The Durban Pelagics, 20, 30, 40 birds.
I mean, not the most interesting from a plumage perspective, but unbelievably good flies.
Yeah, they are. The classic arcing flight. And so really, as the name suggests, great wings, got these really long wings, and they do show these silvery flashes, almost like a sooty shearwater, but very different flight. You wouldn't mistake the two.
Correct.
It's also got the dark bill, again like a sooty shearwater, but it's much stumpier, very heavy bill.
So that's a good separation feature from something like a Giant Petrel,
yep.
Which is obviously an all dark brown bird, but once again the flight is very different too.
Very different, and it's got the white spill, the Giant Petrel and the white chin, if you can see it. But yeah, otherwise, besides the flights, I mean, it's basically all dark brown plumage. you do get these really worn birds, like that first image we showed, the first photograph.
That could cause quite a bit of excitement. I mean, I think we'll get onto that, the Bulwarias.
Yeah.
If you saw those white flashes in the wings, you might be excited to take a Bulwars, I guess.
Yeah, and it's, again, probably looking at the flights of the bird.
Yeah.
So as you can see, this worn bird here is showing those pale coverts. But then maybe looking out for and then also the Bulwars can lose those pale upper wing coverts in heavy molt. So it further confuses things. So, probably looking for it in looking at the flight pattern is a good way to.
It's a way to separate it.
Separate one.
Or a great pick would be useful as well.
Yeah.
Because you can see the different shape of the bird as well.
It would be, and it's got a heavier bill.
Okay. All right. So this is just an underwing shot. And then that's the upper wing shot, and you can even see the paleness coming through here. And
yeah, it's just in heavy molt. You can see it's lost a lot of its, still growing its primary feathers. It's just got its last 3 or 4 feathers there.
All right, so let's move on to one that I think a lot of us would love to see. I don't think, have you seen this one in the sub-region? Not in the sub-region, or?
Yeah, we had one bird about 3 or 4 years ago on the SA Gullis.
That's right, I actually remember that.
At about this time of year also.
So very, very rare, and we'll talk about the features, but this we've got some nice pics to illustrate this bull-necked appearance.
Yep.
And then the silvery highlights the leading edge of the wing, which I think is a very, very nice feature too.
Yeah, it is, and just very variable, as you can see, dark hooded to.
Yes.
And it often always show that that dark eye-ring. Oh, sorry, dark feathering around the eyes.
Dark eye patch.
Yeah.
So I mean, your confusion bird here is obviously a dark morph softy, but you're almost more likely to see a Kerguelen than a dark morph
exactly.
softy.
And probably the best way to pick out a Kerguelen Petrel is looking at the flight pattern.
Yeah. You were talking to me about that before. Maybe just explain it and describe it.
So we've got a bizarre flight. So you can be sitting on the on the monkey bridge on the SA Gullis 40 meters up, and you can have a Kerguelen fly past you. Not banking, going up and down, just going straight at, in a straight direction, just shooting past you. So we've got this really bizarre behavior, flying really high above the surface of the water. And you can also pick them out. They hover like kestrels.
Okay.
So if you see a seabird like this hovering in the middle out of the ocean, there's a good chance it's a Kerguelen.
And no other pelagic species do that necessarily?
Not regularly, no.
Okay.
So that really is the best way to pick them out. And then, along with this really bull-necked appearance and those silvery flashes to the forewing.
Yeah, and you made the comment as well to me offline that it's a really tough bird to photograph because they don't tend to follow ships. And they're
exactly.
not that friendly.
So I can really appreciate Peter's photos. I think these are mostly Peter's.
So there's just an illustration that's a softy. I didn't label it, but that's a softy on the right hand side, and you can see it does lack the silvery sort of leading edge on the inner part of the wing. And there's a great shot of Pete's showing that very whitened leading edge.
Yep.
And then this is a pic from John, and I think it illustrates that bullheadedness so well because you can see it looks like a short dumpy bird with that bullhead.
Yeah, so you might look at that and think great wing petrel.
Yeah. But
great wing would have those longer wings, and as you said, that bull-necked appearance just looks really squashed, like it's been flattened.
All right, and then white-headed. So this is a bird I never thought I'd see, and then we had that magical morning on the flock.
Yeah.
Where that first morning where we had grey petrel and then the sooty albatross and the light mantled, and then we had quite a few sightings of white-headed, and it just goes to show that you get in that deeper water and you see these birds.
Yeah, I mean that's probably the best few hours of birding in
sub-region history.
Yeah. And we had a few of these birds, and they're really distinctive. We've got these long, thin wings, so quite a bulky bird, and entirely white underparts with a white head.
Yeah.
So it could be mistaken for soft plumage, but softies have got that darker cap, dark grey cap, and the full collar. And
we'll show the other feature when we show the bird from the top. It has a much paler tail than
as you can see in Francis' illustration.
Okay, so that's the one bird we had, I think, on the second day on flock. And I think viewers of our webinar have probably seen more of that photo than they care to remember. But there's a nice pic of that much paler tail, and that lovely scalloped grey back with a very white head.
Yeah,
I
and
mean,
then with that dark eye patch
Yeah.
also really stands out.
So I know we saw a lot of softies on that trip as well, which when you first looked at them, you thought you might have a white-headed, but as soon as you see that grey cap to the top of the head,
Yeah,
it rules out a
and
white-headed.
that white tail, as you
Yeah.
mentioned. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so moving on to this bird, and this one's it's got a bit of a story.
Yeah.
Were you on the MV Madagascar many years
I
ago?
wasn't. No, I was writing
Matric exams, yeah. So I wasn't. I was out of matric, maybe 1 or 2 years out of matric. But the MV Madagascar, we had very quiet moments, and we got quite far out of sort of normal waters, and we saw some good stuff, but not as much as we had hoped. But then I think on our last day, I was on deck at about 4:30 in the morning. It was midsummer. In the east, and so it was fully light by 4:30 in the morning, and I was out on deck, and then it just went completely nuts because someone spotted this bird, and this is I got to give Trevor a lot of credit for this, because camera equipment wasn't quite what it was then as it is today, and he got an amazing photo of this Barrows petrel. So I think Andrew Sutherland, I think it had one previous record. But in a very quick moment, the number of people who had Barrows petrel on their sub-region lists, I think, went up by about 200 times. So another great story is I won't mention any names, but one of our very well-known birding personalities in South Africa, he was still fast asleep. And somebody, a very kind soul, decided to run down to his cabin, knock on his door, and drag him out of bed up the steps and make sure that he actually added this to his list. I would never have left the deck if there was a Barrows petrel flying around the ship. So it was one of the most memorable moments of my birding career. Have you seen a Barrows, Dom?
Yeah, so I had a few. So as we've done more trips, and especially with Neil doing as many trips out of Durban, they're actually not too difficult. I mean, I think we're given them 7 maybe for the rarity value.
I had it as an 8. But you downgraded it to 7, which annoyed me because it's a bird that I do have.
Yeah, so I mean, in late October into November, if you do a Durban Pelagic, I think probably 2 out of 3 trips are getting these birds, and sometimes up to 20 birds in a day.
And the big difference here compared to a lot of the birds we've already spoken about tonight, this is definitely not a Southern Ocean bird. This is a tropical island breeding bird.
So this breeds on Reunion Island.
Okay.
It's endemic to Reunion breeder. So definitely more tropical, and it's got these white underwings, which is pretty unusual for a pterodroma, and it's got those nice those lines,
the carpal lines.
Carpal lines, and dark cap. So contrastingly dark cap, and you might even be at distance. You could even mistake it for a Corey shearwater.
Okay.
It's got that similar dark upper wing with a pale undersides, but it's got this black bill. And it's got that dark cap. So Corey's got a much paler cap and that long, thin yellowish bill.
And then obviously that's the Fancy's plate, white underwings, the black cap, the short black bill. And that's a really cool photo of the upper side of the bird, just showing that very dark cap and obviously the very, very dark bill. So really spectacular looking bird.
It's got a great history in South Africa too, the bird, because there were reports in the late 80s. There were 2 sightings from Mozambique, southern Mozambique, and obviously that was before the digital photography era, and these birds were sort of maybe not given
the credit that they deserved.
It was really when Andrew saw it in 2004, 3.
All right, and then this is also a bird I'd love to see, and quite distinctive. But we'll talk about some of these white-bellied, dark-headed petrels and compare them. But Atlantic petrel is not a bird that you're going to come across too often. It's obviously breeding on Gough Island, which is in the Atlantic, giving it its name, but something we don't see very often.
No, and there's been very few sightings close to land. Most are really far out.
All right, so the distinctive features, the big differentiating feature between this and I'm just trying to think which one it was with the white vent. Which dark-headed petrel has the white vent? I'm not gonna. We'll talk about it in a sec. We'll have some nice comparison shots. And there's a nice shot of the underside.
So Chindadi and Tahiti.
Correct. Yes, that's right. The Tahiti.
Yeah. So they're paler vents.
Okay, sorry to put you on the spot there. I panicked myself. Okay, so here we go. We should have waited till we got to this slide. Okay, so this is not how it appears in Sasol, but I snipped them and I put them together. And I think it's probably not a comparison that people have done too often. And they're three incredibly rare birds. But it's probably worth having a look at, because I think someone's going to see one of these at some stage and will remember this webinar in the dark recesses of their mind and not fumble around and try and guess what it was. So, got Atlantic on the left-hand side. You got the Trindade, which we'll talk about in a second, in the middle, and then Tahiti on the right-hand side. Tahiti's got the white vent.
Yeah, and it's so maybe we've sort of got the sizes.
Yes, I apologize. They're not in the right size.
Yeah, so
tell us about the sizes.
Yeah, so Atlantic on the left there, it's a very bulky bird, very heavy chested. It's got these broad wings compared to both these birds on the right, the Trindade in the middle and the Tahiti on the right. They're much slimmer, sleeker looking birds. And then, as you pointed out, the vent color is important. But then the big difference between the Trindade in the middle and the Atlantic is the underwing coloration.
Yeah.
So that generally, even the dark, so you get dark morph Trindades, which I think we'll show later on.
We'll show the dark morph Trindades as well.
But they still show these quite obvious highlights in the underwing. And they can actually look very much like a great wing petrel. Okay. But it's got that's again slimmer build and the white highlights, pale highlights.
All right, so there's photographs, and that's Pete's photo on the left. And then I had to scrape these two off the internet from eBird. Not too many photos of Trindade from Southern African birds, unfortunately. We'll talk about Trindade in a sec, and then obviously Tahiti, which has got that very obvious white vent.
Yep.
Okay, so Trindade, I've given it a 10. I must be honest, I'd hardly ever heard of it until I started preparing this webinar. We spoke about the only record, Dom.
Yeah, so that is off the Eastern Cape. It might have been 2014 or something like that. I think it was a pale phase bird, so maybe looking quite similar to that bird. And so these birds breed mostly on Trindade Island, which is off Brazil. And there's actually a very interesting population of birds on Round Island, which is near Mauritius. And originally they thought they were all Trindades, but after doing genetic research, they found out that it's mostly Trindade, but also chromatic and herald petrel, I believe it is. And what's bizarre about that is both those birds are Pacific birds, which don't come anywhere near here. But somehow a few birds manage to land up on those islands, and it's a really interesting population. But I don't really know what to call
make of it.
It's a bunch of hybrids, really.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. And that's on Round Island in
Mauritius.
Yeah. All right, so not a bird you'd expect to see, but here you can see the two morphs. There's obviously a very pale morph. There's the intermediate, and then the dark morph, and we'll show a comparison.
It almost look like a jager.
Yeah.
These white flashes.
Yes.
Look at that bird, that's middle bird. There's white flashes in the underwing.
It does look a lot like a jager, but obviously very different flight.
Yeah.
And that's the comparison. The bird on the right there, sorry, I haven't labeled it, but the bird on the right is a great wing petrel.
Yeah.
And the bird in the middle is the Trindade.
Yeah. So again, I mean, with the right light, it can look very pale on a great wing petrel, the underwing, but it shouldn't ever really be as defined as that.
Yeah.
It's also got a longer tail, Trindade petrel, than a great wing, which is much stubbier, as you can see in France's illustration there.
All right. Okay. So this is the moment. Dave's standing by on his phone. We've got two smaller groups of petrels to come, and then we'll be finished. But this is the last bird in the sequence of Dom's really, really lousy pelagic bird photos. So if everyone's ready, I hope you've typed the letter D, and then you're going to type the name of the bird as fast as you can, and then send it through to Dave. So Dave, your phone's going to start going berserk. Ready, steady, go. Okay, so that's D. So we've got A, B, C, and D.
And then Dave's number again, if anyone joined late.
Put it on the chat.
Okay, it's
so
on the
Dave's
chat.
number's on the chat. For those watching on Facebook, it may not be on the chat, but 082 545 8000. So those of you watching on Facebook, 082 545 8000. So fastest finger first. I can't see Dave's phone going. Maybe your photos are so bad that no one knows. All right. Okay, so now yet another group of birds that we're mostly not likely to see. So this is a wonderful shot of a Bulwaria petrel from John.
Yeah, it's an amazing shot.
It really is an amazing shot, and we don't see photos of birds this rare. Well, I mean, I guess it's not globally rare. Well, John will probably correct me, but it's a bird that we just don't even dream of seeing.
Yeah.
And it's such a cool photo. All right, so here are the three Bulwaria and Pseudobulwaria petrels, and they are very long-winged birds, Dom.
Yeah, they are, and like Johannes especially has this quite small head, and when you throw in the long wings, it's got quite a distinct look to it.
Yeah. So I mean,
that's
if you look at Johannes over here, and interestingly, these are all tropical pelagic birds.
Yeah, they are. So like I guess best chance would be in the Mozambique Channel, maybe off Durban if we're lucky. But really just spending a lot of time in those waters, which I think where's most of all the Johannes petrel records. There's one from the MV Madagascar trip.
That's right.
I believe. Yeah. So very similar to a great winged.
Yeah.
So probably looking for a different flight is a good way too. And that you've really got these
much
heavy,
longer tail as well.
Longer tailed, long wings, but also that very heavy bill, which is even heavier than a great winged.
All right, yet another amazing shot of a Bulwaria. This is, I suspect John will also correct me, but this is probably the same bird in that first photo. So a really tough bird to see. We've allocated it a 9.
Yeah.
Something that's very noticeable. We've spoken about already. These pale covert bars, but be very, very careful of a worn great winged petrel as well.
Or a Johannes also.
Also, Johannes also wear.
They can show that also, but it's interesting to note here. Well, important to note is the shape of these pale coverts. So it's almost teardrop shaped. Yeah. And very defined.
Okay, I see that.
Yep.
So more consistent shape rather than a bit of a haphazard shape.
Yep.
But this illustration of fancies, I think, is really depicts the bird very well. Just shows how long those wings are of a Bulwaria. There we go. That's we just had to show that photo again.
Yeah.
And then here's Johannes, and I have to be honest, there aren't too many great pictures of Johannes out there.
No, it's a tough bird. So it only breeds on, I believe, 2 islands. There you go,
Socotra
and Oman. Some of the islands off Oman. And I think it was fairly recently that the breeding islands were found. Yeah. Might have only been in the last 2 or 3 decades. And again, it's another extremely rare bird of our waters, and best chance would be Mozambique Channel.
So we'll get. So Neil will have to invite us up there to spend a bit of time on a pelagic trip with him.
Yeah.
Okay, so Johannes, it's likely to be a lot darker on the upper side.
Yep.
But it does get a little bit of these pale covered bars.
And not as attenuated or wedge-shaped tail as Bulwarias. And there's longer wings and a smaller head.
Yeah, and it does seem to have a very large bill.
Yeah, it's got a massive bill. Yeah.
All right, so that's an eBird photo, and I think that just shows you that those pale covert bars.
Yeah.
But that bill is really very noticeable.
Yeah.
Okay, and then a nice underwing shot, consistently brown. All right, and then I think this is a photo that Neil is very proud of, and he spoke about this particular bird at the Sasol launch.
Yeah.
So we won't go into too much detail, but there's only one official record, but there was a claim of a record in the past.
Yeah, there's a couple claims from southern Mozambique, which it sounds like they were Tahiti petrels, but I think they were just passed off because there's no photo, and as you can see, it's probably 5,000 kilometers away. It's the closest record, yeah.
So it's just an outlandish record,
which,
but it's not impossible, as you know with seabirds.
Seabirds wonder, yeah.
All right, and then just those features are quite obvious. Sorry, I haven't credited this photo. This pic is off the internet. I think I credited it earlier on in the presentation. It's an eBird pic. And then we come to our final group, and it's a relatively simple one. So we're talking about the Procellaria petrels, which are quite large petrels, relatively speaking.
Big, quite bulky birds, heavy bodies, and a much more languid flight. Yeah. They're quite lazy. They're not going to be doing these big arcs like the pterodromas, which really pump their wings, do a big arc down again. Yeah. So they're not going to really be doing that. And that's probably why chin is one of our most common.
Yeah, it's something. It's turned out a bit weird in the way I've set out this webinar. We wanted to focus on some of the more common species that you'd expect to find. I mean, white-chinned petrel, if there's a decent onshore wind at any sort of rocky outcrop into the ocean and you stand there with the scope, white-chinned petrel and sooty shearwaters are probably the more likely pelagic birds you're going to see from land. And when you do a pelagic trip, you don't have to be that far away from land to actually start seeing white-chinned in their numbers. So great opportunities to get some pictures. Those are the 3 Procellarias. White-chinned, we allocated at a 1. Plenty of them out there and really an easy bird to take. So if you're going to do your first pelagic trip, you can almost write this one down before even getting out there.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
All right, so a very distinctive bird with a pale bill, the white chin, which is very variable. So sometimes quite small. In this illustration of Fancy's down here, and then sometimes a bit more extensive. And then this is the only thing I really wanted to highlight from an ID perspective with white chins, is that they often get this this leucism, form of leucism on their heads, which, and unfortunately, I mean, Trevor and John sent me a couple of leucistic white chins, but nothing that really represented the spectacled petrel confusion. How would you pick out a spectacled from a white chin with leucism like this?
Yeah, so the important thing to look at is the bill tip. So as we'll show, spectacled next, that's got a black tip to the bill, or dark tip to the bill, whereas white chin is always, it's pale throughout. And if you look at the spectacles, the white spectacles, so as this illustration shows, they can be extremely variable, but they almost never show that white on the forehead, whereas a spectacled will always have some form of white on its forehead, even if it's just a little patch on its forehead.
All right, so we'll come to, I feel like we should have had a slide next to you, but we'll come to the spectacles and see that white, I guess.
But yeah, it's a combination of dark tip to the bill with the white on the forehead.
Okay, so that's your classic white chin with quite a bit of white on its chin. Nice pale bill. There's another one, all dark on the upper parts, quite a big bulky bird, a little bit lumbering as far as these petrels go.
Yeah, especially compared to a sooty shearwater, much heavier bird.
Correct. Okay, so there we go. That shows those features absolutely perfectly, Dom. I'm pleased you described them because now we can see them. There's some white on the forehead and there's that dark tip to the bill.
And then these are just, they're endemic breeders to inaccessible island. So it's in the South Atlantic.
Yeah, so that's where we can see in this map over here, there's an inaccessible island over there. And am I correct in saying this is a relatively recent split from white chin?
It is, yeah, I think in the last maybe 3 decades.
Okay, so it was classified as a white chin in the past,
Yeah,
with a very white
species,
spectacle.
Yeah.
All right, so a bird that we don't see that often, I guess maybe 1 in 10 pelagics might
it's
get
mostly summer pelagics off Cape Town. There's been 1 or 2 records now from Durban, but it's really a Cape and West Coast bird.
Yeah, I think there were a few records from the pelagics that went earlier this year before lockdown.
Yeah,
I think there were a couple. Yeah. And this photograph might even have been taken on one of those. Okay, so there you get also very variable white, and it's amazing how it doesn't seem to have the white chin, but you're saying it's got the white on the forehead, and then you're looking for that dark tip to the bill, and that's a key. And Fancy's Neil has annotated that quite well. The extent is variable, but always some white on the forehead, which you won't expect to see in the white chin.
Yep.
All right, and then this is our swan song.
Okay.
And another very special bird. I know they're relatively common further south, but we had 1 grey petrel on flock on that first morning, and I know that they have been seen. I know that they are seen occasionally on Durban pelagics as well. Yeah,
Neil's been getting a few January and late. So these are winter breeders. So there's been a few records now in November, October. I keep saying it, but it's another one of these birds which you go off the shelf, and it's not so difficult. Yeah,
uncommon at all. There's a lot of them. I mean, you haven't given us any confusion species because there's a pretty distinctive bird. But if I look at that, I would look at it and say potentially a Corey shearwater with that yellow bill.
Exactly. Yeah, so with a yellow bill, but it's a much bulkier bird. Again, it would have very different flights to a Corey shearwater, which would be much lower to water, flap, glide, whereas this will be more up and down. Languid. Excuse me. So dark, very dark underwings with a pale body and that dark cap, dark grey cap, which stands out especially against a pale bill.
Okay. And there's a great shot over there, and you can see it's very clearly a petrel. It's a heavier.
Yeah, really bulky birds. Yeah.
All right. I mean, Dom, I think that's it. So before we go on to the mystery birds, Dave, have you had any answers, or has it been slim pickings out there?
No,
okay. Well, before you go,
the timing was
good.
Tricky.
Or was it okay?
At about 8 o'clock, some people went had load shedding, so they missed the last.
Oh dear, I think that's why we had some numbers drop off. That's a bit of a pity.
8 o'clock,
But I mean, maybe before, and that's just, I'm afraid, the way it goes. But maybe before we do the mystery birds, just another huge thanks, Dom, to spend your time. And I'll be honest and say that I didn't even offer him a beer because my beer stocks at home are looking low. So thank you very much for attending again, and I really hope that you're going to agree to do the Shearwaters and the Stormies.
Yeah, sure. It's always a pleasure joining you guys. I enjoy this evening.
Fantastic. Dave?
Dom, sorry, before you go.
Oh, we've got some questions. We can take some questions. Yeah.
Andrew de Block. He wants to know why water depth causes such a change in the suite of birds. You mentioned the continental shelf and the drop off.
Yeah.
But what's it all about?
So it's to do with, upwellings. So like where you get the drop-off zone is where you get this cold water coming up, and cold water is nutrient rich, which then means that there's going to be a lot more, life feeding on the nutrient rich waters, which means there's going to be a lot more birds and a lot more top predators, dolphins, whales around. So that's really what it relates to. And when you go out like off the continental shelf into the deeper water, you're really looking for oceanographic features. These essentially mountains, rises under the ocean, which are going to push up that cold water. Yeah, the nutrients and the cold water. So like when we did that flock at sea, that first morning wasn't just by fluke that we saw these birds. Ross Wanless had been, and I think, consulting with some of the other experts as to what oceanographic features and what water we should be looking for. And we hit that water, and it just worked out as good as it could have. Yeah. So that's
fantastic.
That's what amazed me, actually. You kind of think the ocean is featureless and kind of uniform, but there are all these kind of
topographical
features, variation.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so maybe you've got some more questions, but before you do that, maybe just I don't like to use photos that I haven't credited, but unfortunately I got that Bulwaria Prion pic just before we started. I see Jamie White has said the Prion photo was taken by Romy Klusner of Sankop. So Romy, thank you very much for letting us use your picture. Better to ask for forgiveness than for permission, I guess. Dave, any more questions that you've seen in the chat room that are worth asking? Okay, we're keeping people on tenterhooks for this these identifications. So let's go through one at a time, and before you give me the winner, I'll give them one at a time. And maybe Dom, you can talk us through the features as to why they are what they are. I mean, you know what they are, but there are features in these photographs that allow you to identify. Okay, so the first one is a what?
So the first one is it's a Bulwaria Petrel, and that was from northern Madagascar. So you're looking for those almost teardrop-shaped pale upper wing coverts. So, great-winged wouldn't ever be that defined and obvious, and Joinen's probably the same. And it's a slighter-looking bird than a Joinen's. They're really tough, these two. But if you zoomed in there, you might be able to see it's got this wedge-shaped or attenuated
I wouldn't
tail.
embarrass you by zooming in on that photo, Dom.
And then, so next we got white.
Wait. So yeah, I think, let me just, why is it not working? Okay, maybe just the other point is the very long wings. I think it's very obvious. So you can rule out a lot of the smaller petrels with those long wings.
Exactly.
Okay, the second one, I know this is going to cause a little bit of consternation, but give us some features here. What is this bird?
So it's a white-headed petrel in very poor light.
Yeah.
I did really well to get that photo.
Was this one of the birds on flock?
No, it wasn't. This was down south, I think. But that white head, you can maybe just make out a white upper tail and rump. But it's got that nice big eye. Well, it looks like a big eye, but it's a dark patch around the eye. And it really stands out against the white head. And if we were to see the underside, it would have dark underwings and a pale body.
Yeah. All right, and I think this was probably the easiest of the lot, although a little bit tricky with the potential confusion species. This is a
white-chinned petrel, and so you're looking for that or white bill.
Yep.
Or
So
pale bill.
there's no dark tip.
Yep.
And clearly no white on the forehead of the bird,
Yeah.
which would make it a spectacle.
Yep.
Okay, so that's clearly a white-chinned. And then our last one over here, maybe also one of the slightly easier ones out of the four. What is this one here, Dom?
So it's a soft-plumaged petrel, but it's actually got a bit of it's got a pale tip to the tail, which might have thrown in some confusion with the blue petrel there. So that'll just be, I think, old feathers, which have lost their coloration. But you can just about make out that dark M across the upper wing, and it's got that greyish cap. I guess in that dark light, it could be confused with a Barrow's petrel potentially, but that'll show that even darker cap. And you can see the forehead is pale. Yeah. So that's a soft plumage. So
and I think the bill is a little heavier than you'd expect on a blue petrel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a bigger bird.
You can see there is a collar there, but the heavier bill rules out the blue petrel. Okay, so that's soft plumage petrel. So the big moment with a copy of Sasol's 5th edition. We ruled our previous winner out for tonight. So Dave, do you want to? Have you got a winner? I know you looking anxiously at your phone. You're trying to decide whether anyone's got it right.
Mike, the auditors are just busy just checking the timestamps.
Okay.
It's quite tight.
Was it tight?
It's tight. But the winner is Vince Ward.
Vincent Ward. Well done, Vince. Well, we know he knows
very quick on the draw.
Very quick on the draw. We know he's a top pelagic birder and a top bird guide. And so congrats, Vince. That's awesome. Well done.
Yeah, that's impressive. I was very worried there for a while.
That no one would get it. Well, it's quite interesting because Vince sent me a message about an hour. Now, people are going to think that we cheated here, but Vince sent me a message about an hour before we started and asked for the link to the webinar. So I feel like I cheated the second place person out of it, not because I gave him the answers, but because I gave him the link to the webinar. So congrats, Vince. And then the very last thing I want to do, and as we always do and always say with these webinars, we really wouldn't be where we are without the fantastic support that we get from BirdLife. Mark is a great friend of ours in these webinars, and he always punts them very nicely. We're very grateful for that, and we like to share our love by saying, please support BirdLife. If you're not a member, really consider contributing to the organization. It does incredible work. A lot of my good birding friends are BirdLife employees, and they really are passionate about the work that they do for BirdLife. So, and for the birds of South Africa. Yeah. So Dom, a final thank you, and look forward to seeing you out there in the ocean.
Yeah, and in a few weeks' time, I guess, for our shearwaters and storm petrel.
Yes. So that maybe just to highlight that we will not be running that next week. I think I might collapse in a heap if I have to do another webinar next week. We probably will look to do it sometime around August, and we really do hope that these webinars will be useful sort of field guides in moving form for pelagic birders doing their pelagic trips. All right, keep well, keep safe, and look after yourselves. We'll see you soon. Cheers, Dave. Thank you for the work in the background.
Thank you, guys. I've done nothing. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good night.